All right, here's the last one we're going to go over, and this is the one that I feel it honestly should have been the least offensive. We had, I think, 2 or 3 Democrats that voted for it, but that's 2 or 3 out of 48. Right, so here's what it was. HB 2426. Patron was me. Now
I was waiting for us to get to your legislation.
All the bill did. All right, it said it prohibited any school board, public, elementary, or secondary school, including any joint or regional school. So we covered everybody. All right, from withholding merit, like the National Merit Scholarship. Right. This is a thing that goes on across the country. It's a very select group of students that actually get recognized by the National Merit Scholarship for academic excellence. Right. So organizations like that, right, if they send something to the school, and as soon as practicable, needs to give it to the student. That was the bill. Now, why was this necessary? Well, because we had 17 schools in Virginia, 17, to include Thomas Jefferson, which is one of the most, most accolades in Virginia with respect to a governor's school and everything else, that deliberately kept National Merit Scholarship recognition from the students until after the deadline had come to submit their packets for college. Now, some colleges take into account National Merit Scholarships, some do not. There's some universities that actually offer monetary scholarships if you made it in the National Merit Scholarship. And initially, we got the same. Nobody wants to withhold this, right? Nobody wants to withhold this. This was a mistake.
An accident.
This was just an accident. And there was one school district, I think, that they legitimately came out and profusely apologized, said this is not our policy. We apologize. We've put in measures to correct it. But Thomas Jefferson came out and actually said, after they've gone through, they paid something like over $400,000 for equity training at the school. And then they came right out and said, well, we don't want to acknowledge students, but we want to see them as each as individuals. And we thought it would hurt the feelings of students that didn't qualify with the National Merit Society to make a big deal out of giving this over to the other students. So they held them back until after the deadlines, and then they gave them to the students. And parents got furious about that. There was one parent in particular. I'm trying to
while you're finding that, whoever got paid to do that diversity training and equity training,
oh my gosh,
made a killing.
Oh yeah,
$400,000.
Absolutely.
Well used taxpayer funds.
Yeah. Well, and then so the mother, I apologize if I get the name wrong, but Ashra Nomani. She came up and she really kind of blew this off on what had actually happened at TJ and how this was totally unfair to not only her student, but all the other students that had worked really hard to achieve this, who were denied that recognition, not because of a mistake. They were denied that recognition as a part of the equity policy, or at least the equity culture that was taking place at TJ High School. Now, as you can imagine, Ezra Nomani is not like a white Karen somewhere. But she got called by a member of the General Assembly as a white supremacist.
She literally was called that?
Yes.
In the meeting?
No. She wasn't called that directly in the meeting. We had
by a member of the House of Delegates.
No, member of the Senate. Member of the Senate described
Who said it?
Her protest against this as basically being motivated by white supremacy.
Who said that?
So let me get this like just all out there, all right?
Okay.
A bill which said when the school gets notified and gets the certificates, because National Merit Scholarship and some of these other ones send it directly to the school. They don't necessarily send it directly to the student or the parent.
Yep.
Your job, you can't withhold it,
is to give it to the kid.
Is to give it to the kid. That's the bill. That's the bill. Someone even asked, like, well, what's the punishment for this? I'm like, we didn't put one in. We just said
that's a really minor bill.
Super minor. Super minor.
You know, in retrospect, since all the Democrats voted against it, we should have put a punishment in the bill.
We got about I think there was a couple Democrats that voted for it. The vast majority of Democrats in the House of Delegates voted for it, and then they immediately killed it on the Senate side. Not a single Democrat voted for it on the Senate side. So when we tell you, that no, the Democrats know these books are in the schools and they're okay with it, or they're at least not willing to do anything to make you better informed about it. When we tell you that they do want to be able to have men competing in women's sports, and they think there's nothing wrong with that, and you're a bigot if you disagree. When we tell you they don't mind if males undress in front of females in the high school locker room, when we tell you they don't want any sort of school choice that would allow any sort of private entity to be a part of it, or the dollars to be able to follow your student in a different school, when we tell you that there is, in fact, opposition and a war on merit within your public schools to the extent that a school would refuse to pass along awards for academic excellence to the students to make sure that they can get them for their college filings. When we tell you this is happening, you can say you like it, you can say you don't like it, but you no longer get to tell me or anyone else it isn't happening, because they had the opportunity to vote on it. They voted no in almost every single situation. And a majority of vote, and I don't mean a slim majority. I mean, like, on a couple of these, we got onesies and twosies to split off. But in every other single case, they killed these bills. And then when they went over to the Senate, they made sure they never showed up to the governor's desk. So when Senator Louise Lucas gets up there all proud, talking about how she's the brick wall to anything coming over from that, this is what she means. Because everything I just listed, guess what committee it went to? Senate Ed and Health. Guess who the chairman of Senate Ed and Health is? It's Louise Lucas. So nobody gets to tell me anymore that they just were unaware, they didn't know, or they didn't understand. And of course, nobody would want this. Either you do want it and you're lying to people, or you completely lack any sort of courage or ability to get up and explain why this is actually good policy. But there it is.
Can I just point out that type of reaction, the whole, oh, if you support this, the scholarship one, for example, you're a white supremacist, that argument is increasingly less and less and less effective. And we saw this in 2021 when Youngkin won. I dug through the precinct data in Northern Virginia. The precincts that swung the most to the right were the least white precincts.
Yeah.
There was a direct correlation. As shocking as this sounds, the whiter the precinct, precincts are where people go to vote, right? The whiter the precinct in Northern Virginia, affluent, largely extremely liberal is Northern Virginia, for those that don't live in Virginia. You know, southern suburbs of DC, right? The wider the precinct, the less it swung from Joe Biden to Glenn Youngkin. The more racially diverse the precinct, aka the less white voters that lived there, the more it swung from Joe Biden to Glenn Youngkin. Yeah. And you know why? Because when you're a black or Hispanic or Asian, this is especially an issue with the Asian community, because Asian Americans statistically have the highest test scores, and they get statistically discriminated the most against when it comes to college admissions. When you're an Asian parent and you're saying, you know, I don't think it's fair that my child who has a 4.0 or 4.25 GPA is now getting discriminated against when it comes to their college admissions, and already has a bigger hurdle than anybody else to overcome simply because of their skin color to get into a good university. Now they're getting doubly punished because they don't have these awards that they can put onto their college application. And it was just taken away from them despite the fact that they earned it. And then the response is, you're a white, not even you're a racist, you're a white supremacist.
You have internalized white supremacy.
I'm sorry, that the only people saying that are white Democrats. White liberals are the ones that are the most obsessed with this issue. And when you keep telling somebody like a Hispanic voter or an Asian voter that if you don't agree with me on any issue, especially anything related to education, that you're internalizing white supremacy, don't be surprised when they don't vote for you in the next election.
Yeah.
Well, the point of all of this was, again, to show people how bad it has actually gotten in your public schools with respect to ideology, with respect to what they want to prioritize from curriculum to sports, with respect to oversight or even parental knowledge. Right? Forget parental involvement. We're talking about just parental knowledge. I could have used other examples. I had a bill that just said, look, if you invite a speaker from outside of the school system to come in and speak to your class, you just need to send the parent an email notifying them on who it is and when it's going to be. That was it. That was it. Couldn't get one Democrat to vote for it. So this is where we're at right now. All right. It is so fundamental. And don't let anybody tell you it isn't happening. Don't let anybody tell you it isn't happening, because either they're the ones that are ignorant or they're lying to you in order to cover up what their actual intentions are.
In every one of these situations, the left is attempting to claim as much control as they can and retain what they already have. Books, sports, notification to parents. They don't believe that parents are the best influence on their children and that they can raise them better. I mean, every situation they are advocating to retain the most power over children as they can. In every one.
No, and like I said, it was on display. I really thought there was a couple of these that would be fairly easy. But nope. I think the most Democrats who got to come over to vote for any of these was, I think, 1 or 2.
And Nick, this is why we do this show, because at the end of the day, we've been around the park more than once on, Nick, you've had many sessions here now, and both in the majority and in the minority with Republican and Democrat administrations. And I think that we're starting to realize, and I say we rhetorically, we're starting to realize that, you're not really going to be able to convince people in the legislature to vote a certain way or not. Like there maybe at some point in the past that was possible, but increasingly, no, the legislature is where you go to battle. You have to just convince people outside the legislature and then get them to be active so that way you can elect better people to office, because it's almost like this quasi-political religious conviction, right? And you repeat the slogans, you repeat the buzzwords, even if they're completely true.
The dogma.
I support trans rights. What are trans rights? Oh, my right to legally be able to use my pronoun. Oh, so you know that entails coercive speech, right? Oh, well, you're a transphobe.
Yeah.
Oh, because I don't support compelled speech, right?
Yeah.
Or the Leah Thomas case. That's another one on the trans issue. How about on the education issue with the sexually explicit materials, or just any sort of school choice legislation at all? You want to defund public schools. Well, gosh, you're the one that's suggesting that if we give parents a choice, the public schools will be defunded. What exactly is that implying? Right? And so like over and over and over again, you come up with an idea or a proposal to solve a problem, and it's almost like you're just thrown a buzzword. Usually the buzzword is some sort of race-based response. Sometimes it's a gender-based one. Sometimes it's a class-based one, right? But they just immediately go to these buzzwords in order to shut you down, and not just diffuse the argument, shut you down. Say you're not worth debating because you're an evil, bad, horrible human being. And I personally am getting to a point where I realize, as important as it is for Nick to make the argument in the State House, it's actually more important that we make the argument outside the State House, because influencing the culture is how we got to this point. It's politics is downstream from culture. It's not the one that influences culture. It's a one-way, not entirely, but it's largely a one-way street. The culture is what influences the politics. The people that are getting elected to the state legislature now on the Democrat side have been influenced by decades of culture that has been pushing this, which is why I said earlier, if you actually were able to corner some of these people and you ask them, do you honestly believe this? A lot of them would say no, but they're going to still vote this certain way because the culture on the left is enforcing this dogma.
Well, and I want to clarify one point, because I said in all these we only got a couple of Democrats to pass. The last one I mentioned, that was the pass along the information to students. We did get 18 Democrats out of 48 to vote for that.
Well, what a huge accomplishment.
We got 18 Democrats out of 48, and then when it went over to the Senate, they all voted no and it died.
Yeah.
Right in the subcommittee. But yeah, this is where we're at. So look, this is what I want you guys to understand as you're watching this, as you're listening to this, is part of the reasons why we come back and we tell you what's going on in the State House in Virginia is because it's not just Virginia. This is going on all over the country. What makes Virginia somewhat unique is that we actually are the only state house right now with a Republican House, a Republican governor, a Republican AG, a Republican lieutenant governor, and a Democrat Senate in a state that Joe Biden won by 10 points. In every other state house across the country, where you have a Republican control over somewhere within the legislature, Biden won by a smaller margin, and usually it's a much, much smaller margin. So we're kind of in this unique position where we're seeing this clash take place in a very, very purple state and what's going on. And what it does is it gives you some insight on where they're at. Because if the Democrats in a state where they just got shellacked, they lost the House of Delegates, they lost the governorship, they lost the Attorney General's office, they lost the Lieutenant Governor's office. In a state like that, if they're still unwilling to vote for parental notification for explicit materials within your kid's classroom, if they're still unwilling to vote for any sort of dollars following the students, if they're unwilling to vote for any sort of legislation which would say, hey, we're going to protect women's sports, if they're unwilling to do it here in an area where they've got to be heavily competitive, I'm sorry, they're just not even, they're just giving you a preview into what it's going to look like going in the future.